Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith. Today, this is the video called the Top 10 Solo Games from 2017. Now, this is late. I gotta tell you, this is late. Now, I had already been working on this particular list during the holidays, so that was basically at the tail end of 2017. And this was actually supposed to come out in tandem with the other top 10 list that I released on the 1st of January. Which was the top 10 must-have solo games of 2017. So there might be, and I want to make sure that there's an understanding of what the two lists stand for, what they're about, their criteria, that type of thing. So there's no confusion, because I was supposed to, based on time, I was going to put both of those together and release them at the same time to end off the year. But I ended up realizing that the amount of time I had spent on actually creating those two videos was starting to get away from me. And essentially, I wanted to spend the holidays relaxing, as well as spending more time with my family, and especially my brand new daughter, Serenity. So I really didn't want to soak up my entire holidays doing top 10 lists. So this one is extremely late. So you gotta bear with me here on this one, so I do apologize, but I hope it's a great reference for you in terms of games that you might be interested in. Now, what are the differences between the two lists? You might be asking, why do you have two? What is the purpose? Because there actually are some quite substantial differences in how the lists were made. So the one that was released, which you've already seen, and if you haven't, I would ask you to go actually check it out. That one's called the Top 10 Must-Have Solo Board Games of 2017. So the reason the words must-have in there is mainly because these are games that I believe personally that a solo gamer should definitely have in their collection, or at least try. So again, you don't have to take my recommendation on a game and say that it's going to be great. You should always try and stuff like that. And most of you would research on a game itself to make sure the theme fits, the mechanics fit, everything about it is kind of up your alley. But these are just recommendations on my end of games that I believe should be in a solo gamer's collection, or at least something that you should have explored, because these games are like pinnacle of the solo gaming world, essentially. So those 10 that I released in that other video were just that. Now, where there's a difference between this list and that other list, which isn't old, but that other list, is essentially the must-have top 10 list that I released prior allowed so basically all the games that I was thinking of that could have potentially shown up on that top 10 list, all could have had either a core game released in 2017, an expansion released in 2017. It could have been Kickstarter delivered in 2017. It could have been second reprinted, third reprinted, fourth reprinted, etc. in 2017. It could have even had just a small, tiny little, upgrade to the components or something. Like whatever it was, as long as there was some game content specific upgrade or expansion to a product in 2017 and it released, it qualified for that top 10 must-have solo games of 2017. So that was the big distinction. I put that in the description. There was only a few people that missed it. A lot of people read through or watched the video, and I shouldn't say a lot, actually. I've only got 3 messages on the side where people said there was a few games in that list that didn't come out in 2017. And I was like, you got to read the description, because I kind of put a unique take on that. I've seen the whole, top 10 solo games for a particular year. That's done across the board, widely covered. I still want to do it myself, and that's what this video is. It's going to be just the top 10 solo core games released in 2017, whether to retail or a Kickstarter. But the other list, the must-have one, I was trying to basically create a little bit of a different top 10 list where games that were still being ravenously bought by the community and loved could still appear on it. So, for instance, trying to think of one off the top of my head to be a good example. An honorable mention in that other list was something like Eldritch Horror. It didn't make the top 10, in my opinion, of the must-have solo games of 2017, because I don't believe it sits in the top 10 anymore. But I do believe it's an honorable mention because Fantasy Flight still continues to support it by putting out products that enhance it or to make it more fun. And the solo gaming community really gets behind that game in general and usually recommends it. So it's not only that, but my own enjoyment. I still play it. And again, there was expansions released throughout 2017 for it as well. They pretty much are constantly pumping out stuff, kind of like Mansions of Madness, for instance. And that one actually made the top 10 list. So those are examples of games that kind of like they are maintaining their popularity throughout the years, and that's the reason why I put them on that must-have list, and it was a valid thing to do. Even though I mentioned that it was for 2017, the purpose was to just basically highlight games that had any type of content released for them that were must-have games. So what this list is going to do now, hopefully we can make a distinction there, is that this list is going to do what most do, which is essentially this is just going to be the straight core games released in 2017, no talk of expansions, and or I should say Kickstarter delivered in 2017. And that's it. So it won't be any kind of reprints. There won't be any expansion talk, no additional content talk. It's games that legitimately got to people's doors, and this is actually means like the Kickstarters are actually arrived at your door, or games that went to retail this year. So that's what this list is going to be all about. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to transition from this segment where we now understand the difference between the two lists, the one I've already released and the one we're talking about right now in this video. And we're going to continue on talking about what wonderful solo games came out in 2017 as a core brand new experience. So we're going to move into the honorable mention section right now. All right, let's talk about the honorable mentions for the top 10 solo games of 2017. So honorable mentions basically just entails any game which I actually could have substituted a game out of the top 10 list that's coming in a few moments in a separate section here of this video. So basically anything that shows up in this honorable mention section could have been substituted out with something in the top 10, meaning that they were good enough games in their own right to deserve mention right now, but they just didn't cut it, in my opinion, for the top 10. Now, there's other people that will look at these games and say they deserve to be in a place of one of the games I put in the top 10. That's perfectly fine. You have to understand, take these lists with a grain of salt. Everybody has different lists and different favorites and stuff like that. It's really just to give you a great reference, hopefully, that you can use when you're looking into solo games in general. So the very first entry into the honorable mention section for the top 10 solo games of from 2017 is Tiny Epic Quest. Now, this is from Gameland Games, designer Scott Elms, and this one is really cool. Now, there's a whole line of Tiny Epic games. There's Galaxies, there's Defenders, there's a ton of them. These things are not new kids on the block. They've been around for a bit, but the Tiny Epic Quest did come through a Kickstarter and was delivered this year. Now, this game has all kinds of stuff going for it. The fact that it's a massive game. So, for instance, if you actually put this out on your table, you'll be surprised how much of a footprint it takes up for being such a tiny box. So it's kind of a confusing one to describe if you've never seen it before, but essentially it's kind of got a Legend of Zelda top-down feel, kind of like those old Game Boy games where you're essentially moving around, but you're moving meeples, of course. So you've got multiple meeples and you're moving them around. You're trying to score points in a number of different ways, whether it's on the magic track or you're trying to acquire like legendary items. It also introduced item meeples, which is a brand new patented idea where you can actually stick the item you actually collect on your meeple. That's super cool. So there's a lot of really good things going for it. It's a strategy game at the end of the day, and it has mechanisms like area movement, dice rolling, modular boards, and kind of press your luck, because essentially there's a lot of that going on in there too. But anyway, this one was one that I really, really enjoyed. It's something that I haven't gotten around to actually doing a playthrough on the channel just yet, but it's something that I am looking into potentially doing in the near future. But again, this one definitely deserves an honorable mention. Now, second up for the honorable mentions would be First Martians Adventures on the Red Planet. Now, this one, man, when this thing was released, I was super excited. And I think, to be honest, being a massive Robinson Crusoe fan that I am, and even saying that the Robinson Crusoe in my prior top 10 video that it should be retired into the Hall of Fame, this game got me so excited. I thought this was going to be, better than the Robinson Crusoe game, but it isn't. And so I don't want to say that it's not good, because it is a fantastic game. I just don't think that it dethroned Robinson Crusoe. I think it was an evolution of a similar product. So in other words, with Robinson Crusoe, you essentially are starting with nothing and building your way up and trying to handle all the elements thrown at you. First Martians essentially gives you everything. Your whole space station is ready to go from the get-go, unless a particular scenario kind of gives you some few little tweaks to the action in terms of things that are not working properly. But for the most part, when you start a scenario, everything's at your fingertips, which is kind of cool because you have access to all kinds of different things you can do. But then the game slowly starts to degrade the amount of stuff you can actually do by kind of breaking things down. And that makes thematic sense and stuff like that. And that's kind of why a lot of people do enjoy the game. And I actually do enjoy the game as well. I haven't actually played this one on my channel yet, but I've played this off camera quite a number of times. And I really do enjoy it. The best thing I would say is to check out Watch It Played's rule instruction video for this game. It is hands down the best thing you can find. My uncle did a phenomenal job. That's right, Rodney is my uncle, for those of you wondering. And he did an amazing job creating like a really good guide on this game, because to be totally honest, the rulebook was garbage. It was probably one of the worst written rulebooks I've read in a long time. And I wouldn't say that the whole thing was garbage, but they were literally missing connections between how the game flows in the rulebook. So things would just disconnect. And I think what they were thinking in their minds at the time was that the app would be that thing that sits there on the table to kind of connect the dots for you. But if anything, it left a lot of people staring at the board and just blanking out. So Rodney did an amazing job going through the rules and kind of filling those gaps in so that people can understand the game better. And I think as time has gone on, the FAQs have grown, the rulebook has expanded, all that kind of stuff. Things have gotten better for the game. So I would say now is the time to check this thing out. Not so much when it was initially released. There was a lot of confusion rules-wise, but I think things have really sorted themselves out, and they've really been supporting it and adding free scenarios in. But that's enough talk about First Martians. It is definitely an honorable mention for the top 10 solo games of 2017. Coming in third is Clank, a deck building game. So Clank is a well-known and loved, deck building game in general. So if you like deck building, you're gonna love this thing. There's no reason not to check this out. It has great solo app implementation. You can play this with other people as well. But if you're talking on the solo side of things, as I am, you've got a fantasy-based setting here in Clank, a deck-building adventure, but you also can pick up Clank in Space. So when I say Clank, deck-building adventure, Clank in Space also kind of sits with that as well, because technically it was released last year as well. So, both of them are both work in terms of... Oh, sorry, actually, I just realized my mistake. I wrote that down wrong. It's Clank in Space is the one that came out in 2017. My mistake. So that's the one I'm referring to, but in terms of the other one that everyone's already used to, Clank the deck builder, is the fantasy one. So Clank in Space came out this year. Regardless, they're the same thing. It's a reskin, but there's different mechanics. So when I say reskin, take that with a massive grain of salt, because I have both, but they are two different games, but they're running on some similar mechanics between the two. So this one, Clank in Space, essentially has mechanics like action, movement, programming, card drafting, deck and pool building, modular boards, press your luck. So it has those types of elements in. Obviously, card drafting and deck building are the biggest mechanics here. But it's a high recommendation because you can play this stuff solo. It's really worth checking out. So this is my third honorable mention for the 2017 top solo games. Okay, fourth honorable mention is going into This War of Mine. Now, this game's interesting. I didn't want to actually do a playthrough of this one on the channel, and the reason is because there is so much going on. It's very complex, but for a solo gamer, and I love complex games, but this was just one I was kind of on the fence about originally, and it won me over. So I started out being a little hesitant when I played it, and I decided that I didn't have the time, based on all the other games that I was playing at the current time, to put this on the channel. And that's not the reason why this is in the honorable mentions section. I just have a couple issues with the game itself in terms of its mechanics and how it moves. I don't think that the rule book and following the rule book to kind of figure out the gameplay was the best way to do it. There is a lot going on here. Like, if you want to talk about token punching, this is like Gloom Haven on steroids. There's a ton of tokens in this game. And again, you can learn all this kind of stuff and pick it all up. The rulebook will lay it out nicely that way. But there is a learning curve here. You got to figure things out, and it is complex. It's not super complex, but it's complex. But it is fun. It does have a kind of a bleak feel to it. So if you're into the types of games, so actually, for instance, I guess a good comparison, the reason I put on this list is that Kingdom Death Monster is a massive bleak game. Like, the game is meant to punish you. That's what this War of Mine basically is, but it has a real heart behind it. And when I say real heart, not that Kingdom Death doesn't have heart, but this has real life kind of attached to it. So when you're actually playing through this game, you'll feel something inside of you when certain human interactions take place. So this game can actually kind of, that can be a good thing. It can actually help you learn. It can help you relate to some of the situations that happen during the times mentioned in this game, but it can also kind of push players away, and they'll say, I don't really want to experience that over and over again. I don't want to experience failure over and over and over again. So there's a couple things there that are banging heads and may or may not fit what you're looking for, but if you're looking for a game that really honestly is going to make you think about your actions and your choices, and you've played the video game, for instance, and are a fan of it, I would say this is definitely a recommendation. It's a really good one. It just didn't make the cut for the top 10, but it is still a fantastic one, and I still enjoy it. So this is called This War of Mine, the board game, and it's created by Awakened Realms. Now, this particular one, just to talk about mechanics really quick, has action point allowance system. It has cooperative play, has dice rolling, grid movement, press your luck, and it also has role-playing simulation, storytelling, and worker placement. So there's your kind of overall talk on that one. Now, there's only one more honorable mention, and this is it before we get into the top 10. So this is going to be the last game that didn't make the cut, but is definitely worth checking out, and that is Spirit Island. Now, this is going to shock some people because I know there's a handful of, I've actually listened to quite a few top 10s for 2017, and not all of them are Spirit Island at the top, but a lot of them speak really highly of it, and I agree with them. I've played it, I enjoy it. And I honestly do think it deserves to be on top 10 list, 100%. So there's going to be people that are watching the channel are going to say, this thing needs to be on your top 10, or that list is no good. Well, I would argue the other way around. I would say that everyone has a preference in terms of theme, in terms of mechanics. Spirit Island definitely hits the nail on the head with mechanics. And it also hits the nail on the head with the Spirit Island thematic feel of the game with those mechanics. So that being said, I do enjoy that stuff, which is why it's on the honorable mention, but I just didn't think that the theme resonated with me enough to pull me in. And I don't know how else to say this because it's kind of hard to put it into words, but essentially I was playing the game and I was enjoying the mechanics of it solo, and I even actually ended up playing this one with other people as well, but I just, for some reason, once I was done playing it, it didn't, for me anyway, it didn't give me, when I put it back on the shelf, it stayed there. And I never had another urge to be like, I really missed that experience. I want to try it again. I almost played it and was like, that was cool. And then I kind of moved on to something else. And I realized very quickly that I wasn't going to go back to it. And so it's crazy because there's some games that happens to. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example. You know what, to be honest, Mage Knight might even fall in that category. So Mage Knight's a fantastic game, and there's no way I can compare that to Spirit Island. But I would say that, like, Mage Knight's kind of like that. It's like you put it on the shelf, and then every once in a while you pull it out and you play it, and then you're like, I'm good. I probably won't touch that for 6 months to a year. And I think Spirit Island kind of is like that, unless, of course, you are like so in love with the theme that you want to play it all the time. And if that's the case, that's perfectly fine, because I have a couple games that just constantly keep coming off the shelf. So again, like I said, this list is mine. Yours may change, but I wanted to give this 100% honorable mention to Spirit Island. Designers are Eric Rios, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from Greater Than Games. Greater Than Games. And it really is fantastic. So 100%, you have to try it. You have to check it out. The other thing I'll say about it is thematically sits very high in my opinion, but it's just the problem is the game is so thematically well done, and it's honestly one of the reasons why it's so popular. But then at the same time, I don't like the theme, so it breaks it for me almost instantly, because the game itself, even on Board Game Geek, if you check it out, isn't ranked that high. It's actually sitting, I think it's under 200 overall. So it's not, it hasn't even cracked the 200. So it's still a great game. And there's like, it's kind of hard to say, you know, that's a reason to knock it. My reason to knock it's essentially that I didn't go back to it, but that was just my personal thought. But again, if the theme doesn't work for you, the experience breaks down pretty fast, because at the end of the day, you're playing the mechanics, and if the mechanics don't have a thematic fun level for you, it breaks the experience pretty fast. So, and to be honest, that's the way it is with every game. If you're not into the theme, it doesn't matter how good the mechanics get and stuff like that, it's not going to work. And vice versa. Sometimes the theme's amazing, but the mechanics are garbage. So it's kind of a balance there. But anyway, for those of you that love Spirit Island, I don't want to ramble on about this too long, and I've had people mention like, hey, have you played this? You should really check it out. I have played it. I don't have any plans to play it on the channel as of right now because I owned it and I got rid of it. But it is a great game. It's a game that has to be tried. You have to try it, because if it does fit your likes and dislikes, then you'll that's all that matters at the end of the day. Doesn't matter what I say. You know, if you like it, you like it, and run with it. But it's something I had to put on the honorable mention list because of how well it's done, and it does have a great following. So anyway, that's going to wrap up the honorable mentions. Hopefully this didn't go too long, and we are going to move now into the exciting reveal for the top 10 solo board games of 2017. And as I did last time, I'm going to have Serenity come back for some dice rolling. She's going to be the one who's going to be rolling the dice as we go from 10 to 1 to find out what are the top 10 solo core experiences or Kickstarter releases that came out in 2017. Number 10, we have Near and Far. That's right, Near and Far. Now, this one is special, and the reason that this one landed on the solo list is going to confuse so many people. And that's okay. That's the reason why this is on the 10th spot of the list and not any higher. It had to be mentioned because this game is normally for 2 to 4 players, and actually, according to Board Game Geek, the best player count for Near and Far is at 3. So there's no mention there of solo gaming whatsoever. However, if you check out the Kickstarter page near the end of their campaign, which ran in 2017, they released a soloable not playthrough, but soloable content, allowing you to essentially play the game as one character. Now, a lot of you may not have known this, but this was kind of released on the side within the Kickstarter. So unless you were part of the Kickstarter, you wouldn't get the update that would have told you that. But they've already released that content, and they've already released it for you to actually download right now. And I believe on the file section of Board Game Geek, the Near and Far Automa has been uploaded, called Solo and Cooperative Modes added in. It has the rules, it has the cards, so you can essentially start doing this right away. This is really cool, and I started playing this myself off camera. Of course, I haven't done any playthroughs on my channel just yet, but I do plan on doing a playthrough of this Near and Far one at some point in the future here. So I wanted to make mention that this definitely made the top 10 games, and the main reason for this is not only do the mechanics of the game not only are they phenomenal, the artwork is amazing, and Ryan Locken has a huge history of success with his prior games, none of which play solo. At least the major ones anyway, like Above and Below and all these other ones. But people have always been chomping at the bit to try to find a way to play it solo, and they finally released that Automa, and it just makes the game, it just changes the whole game for me. Originally I was kind of like, I have it in my collection, but I don't play it that often, and stuff like that, even though I know it's a great game to play with others, and I really, really wanted to have that narrative experience, and he's made that possible. So this game, if you don't know anything about it, is typically released through Kickstarter. Red Raven Games normally does that. The mechanisms in the game are card drafting, dice rolling, root, network building, set collection, storytelling, all that good stuff. So it's got a whole bunch of good mechanisms there that I really like. It's strategic and it's thematic. It's perfect for me anyway. So this is why I think it deserves a spot on the top 10 solo board games of 2017. Highly recommend, if you don't have a copy, that the retail edition is totally worth it. There's like, the only difference between the retail and the Kickstarter edition is metal coins. I believe that's the only difference, so you're not missing out on anything if you pick this one up in retail, and you can just go download the soloable Automa for this right away. So high recommendation, number 10. Number 9, Legacy of Dragon Halt from Fantasy Flight Games. And this one was tough. This is one of the ones I had the hardest time putting on the list because I really, really enjoy it. I've played this one on the channel, so if you haven't actually checked that out, be sure to go find the playthrough to see a little bit more. And as you're watching here, you're seeing me play through it, so you're actually seeing some of that footage right now. But regardless of that, Legacy of Dragonholt is published by Fantasy Flight Games, as we all know. This game, and Nikki Valens is the one who actually designed this particular game. This game is massive storytelling in a box. So you are not getting what would be normally called a board game. So, I mean, it is a board game because it falls into the board game realm, but it is totally not. It is a choose your adventure game in a box. You're going to get a bunch of books. You're going to get a map for a city. You're going to have a bunch of different item cards and things like that, and you get a couple counters. That's it. And that sounds really thin and stuff like that, but I can tell you right now, the quality of writing in these books is phenomenal. It's awesome, and I highly recommend you check it out. One of the biggest reasons I think this deserves to be on the 2017 top solo games is because of how accessible it is, how easy to travel it is with this particular product. I've already taken this thing on the road. It's awesome. So the coolest thing about it is just being able to pick up a book and walk out the door and know you've got a game in your hand. You know, again, yes, there's an argument that there's choose your own adventure books everywhere, and this isn't something new, but they did create what they like to call the Oracle system within this, and of course it captures a little bit of role-playing elements within this choose your own adventure kind of world. So you can't think of it as just a choose your own adventure game. It has role-playing elements in there, so you will need to keep track of some things on paper, but it's minimal. It's not going to require a great deal of effort that way. You might be tracking some numbers of which story you've progressed through or which path you've taken. You'll be recording items that you've collected and experienced and things like that. But for the most part, you could do that in the back of a car. You could do that on the bus. You could do it anywhere. It's very, very accessible and very easy to do. That's one of the main reasons why I highly recommend this one. And it's also a totally different experience than what most of us are used to with having to be home sitting in front of a table. So high recommendation, Legacy of Dragonholt from 2017, top solo board game. Number 8, Gloom of Kilforth, a fantasy quest game by Tristan Hall, All or Nothing Productions. This game was so much fun to play on the channel. I can't even tell you. The gameplay at the beginning took a little bit to just get the rules nailed down just right. The rulebook itself is good. I would say that it probably needs a couple things changed, and I think that Tristan's probably already looking into those changes to just make it that much easier to learn. But I can tell you, when we got to the end of this playthrough, the stress levels were getting a little high. My particular character was doing very poorly out of the gates, and the game was punishing me for my poor choices and lack of knowledge, and it was really showing how much you have to make the right choices in this particular world. Really, if you don't know anything about this game, really you have a grid of cards on the table. They're going to represent a bunch of locations. All these locations are falling into gloom as you're going through them. Bad things are happening in the land. You're trying to essentially go through the land, and you're trying to find this last overall overlord monster essentially at the end of the game. You can actually pick who you want to fight before you begin. So you can pick the overlord or the evil one that you want to go after at the very beginning, and then throughout the game you're trying to upgrade yourself and equip yourself. It has tons of role-playing elements. So just when we were talking prior about Legacy of Dragonholt, this is kind of like Legacy of Dragonholt on the table as a board game. So you're going to have role-playing elements as you play through it. You're going to have to connect the dots on some of the things, so you can maybe weave in your mind, a little bit of a story between, well, I was over here in the plains area and I fought this particular monster, and then I moved over here and found a tomb. So again, you can go about it very mechanically. You can move around the map, but you lose a little bit of that fun thematic storytelling if you just do it for its movements and actions. What I highly recommend you do is take a look at the playthrough I did, and as you go through it, if you talk to yourself, even though that sounds crazy, as you go through it, you can actually really weave yourself a really cool story as you go through. Your character's my character, at least when it started, was being beat up pretty badly, and he was basically near death at the beginning of the game, but he turned it around so fast at the end, and we were able to take out the the big evil, and it was awesome. So the game has mechanisms like cooperative play, of course, but I'm talking about this in a solo capacity. Has dice rolling, modular boards, role playing, and variable player powers. So again, this one was a Kickstarter, so he currently does quite a few Kickstarters. So in other words, new games are coming out. So he has some other ones like 1066, and there's a couple other games he's churning through. I think he also has a new expansion that's coming for Gloom in the future as well. So in other words, if you miss this Kickstarter, it's not one of those ones that's going to be impossible to get later. He will allow you through other Kickstarters to pick it up, and I think maybe if you have a way to contact him directly, he may even allow you to be able to purchase it straight through him. I don't know 100% on that, but you can look into it. So again, this is one of those games that I highly recommend for solo play. 100%. It's a ton of fun. It's hit the table a number of times for me, and I've really enjoyed it, and it will be staying in my collection. The artwork is second to none. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Has to be mentioned that the artwork was done consistently throughout the entire game. So the artist basically that was chosen did all the cards, and I really appreciate that because there's a lot of card games that mix artists and then the look is not uniform, and I really appreciate a card game, especially if it's a card game that has artists that are static and it's uniform across the board. You just get a much better presentation and it immerses you in the game much better, in my opinion. Gloom definitely deserves to be on this list. It is, like I said, it's just a great game. So check it out, 100%. Gloom of Kilforth by Tristan Hall, sitting at number 8. Number 7. It's Nemo's War, the second edition. So Nemo's War, the second edition, came out in 2017. There was one prior to this one that came out in the past. We're not going to talk about that one. This is for the second edition, which saw a new kind of artistic take on the game that changed some things. They added up and beefed up some of the components. This went through a Kickstarter by Victory Point Games. The designer is Chris Taylor, and he did a fantastic job originally of creating this game and has really recreated or revived this game as one of the best solo games out there in the nautical theme. To be honest, it's a great game. I pulled this one out, I think it's 8-10 times so far in the last while. And this is one of those ones where you'll play it, and as soon as you play one game, you won't want to pack the box up and throw it away and come back to it later. This is one you'll probably want to play and hit a couple times in a row, and then you might put it away. But you'll want to pull it back out later because it does, the theme and the mechanics, everything about it, once you get rolling with it, it's great. And it will call from your shelf for you to play it when it's sitting there. It really is a great one. So this one has mechanics inside of it, like action point allowance. It has area control and area influence. It has area movement, press your luck, simulation, and time tracking. So those are the kind of things that you can find. Of course, it's very thematic. So again, that's kind of right up my alley anyway. Categories are like adventure, exploration, nautical, novel-based, science fiction, all that good stuff. It's really cool. And the other thing that's interesting about it is when you start off the game, you have your choice. When you're being Nemo, you can choose whether you want to be, you can choose to be, go about things in terms of wanting to destroy all the ships. You can go after, you can be a scientist. Like there's 4 different ways inside the base game as to how you want to, gain your points and stuff like that. And the other thing that's really cool is all the points are tracked. So you can kind of compare on Board Game Geek how well you're doing. It's kind of got that Mage Knight feel where it's like, okay, let me see if I can do better the next time and score a higher point total. That's really fun. That really helps a solo player come back because they can constantly be trying to beat their friend or another person that's played this game before. But Victory Point Games did a fantastic job publishing this one, and the designer did a great job. Chris Taylor did a great job getting all the artists together. The artist, Ian O'Toole, fantastic artwork across the board from this stuff. High recommendation at number 7, Nemo's War. Number 6, Dragonfire. Now, Dragonfire is really, really interesting, and it came from a prior implementation of a similar game using similar mechanics called Shadowrun Crossfire, a beloved game in the solo community, which had a lot of deck building elements. Now, Dragonfire basically takes Shadowrun, or that became a game that was tougher to acquire. Shadowrun became really hard to find. I actually tried to get a copy myself. I played it before, but I could not for the life of me get a copy. I know they are available and you can find them, but they're certainly not easy to find. So that was one of the reasons why I haven't played it on the channel yet, because I didn't want to recommend something that's like almost near impossible to find. But if you do have it in your collection, you're lucky. If you can find it, it's worth picking up. But this is talk about Dragonfire. What Dragonfire is all about is a Dungeons and Dragons kind of thematic drop on top of the Shadowrun Crossfire game. But the mechanics have changed a little bit. So it's not 100% exactly the same as Shadowrun Crossfire. And I wouldn't say it's as punishing. I think it is hard. It still is very hard. But I think Shadowrun Crossfire might be tougher, but I haven't played... like I said, I have played Shadowrun Crossfire quite a bit. I have played Dragonfire quite a bit, but I haven't played Shadowrun Crossfire enough, is the best way to say it. I've played it before, but I haven't played enough to say that it's any way, shape, or form easy. It's quite a difficult game and actually does challenge you quite a bit. Whereas Dragonfire I found was easier. The barrier of entry to get into the game was a little bit easier, and I think that's good. But I really hope that as they expand the world of Dragonfire, that they bring back in that difficulty. And I know there's modifications you can make to the game as well to make it even tougher. But it's going to vary between the different encounters and paths that the company decides to take. And that company, by the way, the publisher in this one's Catalyst Game Labs, and the designer was Randall and Bills. There's a whole bunch of other designers, but that's the first one, at least that pops up. Mechanisms, cooperative play, so solo play essentially, deck and pool building are the main ones here, and that's literally it. It's deck building to its finest. So you have to like deck building. If you don't like deck building, this is going to be washed off your list real quick. But if you do, high recommendation for 2017 top 10. Number 5. In the number 5 position of the top 10 games or solo games of 2017, we have Sword and Sorcery from Arius Games. This is a really cool dungeon crawler, and there's a number of dungeon crawlers that I'm really fond of, but this one takes the cake for 2017 easily. Now, this one is most often compared to Descent. There was a lot of people that were like, well, if I purchase Sword and Sorcery, do I get rid of Descent? Or, for instance, if someone's new to solo gaming, they come in and say, which one's better, Sword and Sorcery or Descent? Well, really, at the end of the day, Sword and Sorcery has... a lot going for it, and Descent has a lot going for it. Descent's been around longer, has a lot more content, and does utilize the app in solo mode extremely well. But it is dated, and its mechanics and its functionality and what you can do, its choice, its narrative, everything is a little bit dated. Again, Imperial Assault kind of is starting to build upon Descent and a little bit, in a way, outrank it in terms of its popularity, and probably that'll continue to expand as the app grows for Imperial Assault. But with Sword and Sorcery, it really was an interesting take on dungeon crawlers, because typically it's a point-to-point situation. You go, here's a scenario, here's your objectives, get to the end, kill this, grab this, and then this is your reward. Well, Sword and Sorcery does that, which is the norm for dungeon crawlers, but then along the way has events that will occur that will change in-game and basically change the layout. So, for instance, no two playthrough is exactly alike. The odds increase in terms of how many different ways you may encounter this scenario may occur. So, for instance, you may have a different number of enemies one time in one spot than another, and stuff like that. But the other cool thing is that story elements are actually progressing as you move through the scenario. So when you hit certain spots, certain story elements are popping up, and that's actually changing the course of the game in terms of the narrative. Now, the narrative is good. It's great, actually. It's really well done, well written. There are a couple things in there that are a little goofy and a little bit cheesy, but to be totally honest, overall, pretty good. This also has a lot of World of Warcraft vibes, to me anyway. It uses things like the cooldown mechanism, which again is strongly used in video games in terms of casting a spell, using a talent of some type, and then having to wait for it to cool down. You can buff characters with different conditions. You can, and the dice mechanics are really, really well done, because they don't just roll on D6s, you're rolling on a higher numbered die, which is great because you have a lot more things you have to keep track of, which some people may complain as being a little fiddly, but it also opens up options. And options are good in a dungeon crawler because typically they're really, really streamlined and almost there's not too much strategy and thought put into it. This game adds a lot. It really opens up the doors for multiple different things you can do on your turn instead of narrowing them down to something quite small. So, for instance, Zombicide's a good comparison because there's only so many things you can do in Zombicide to min-max. You really are restricted to only a handful of actions, whereas Sword and Sorcery expands on that. So if you're looking for something with a little bit more depth, this is what you're going to want to grab. So Sword and Sorcery comes in at a very strong recommendation in the number 5 spot for the top 10 solo board games of 2017. Number 4. For the 4th spot of the top 10 solo board games of 2017, we have the Seventh Continent. This one was an awesome Kickstarter. And not only was the first one amazing, the second one was just as ridiculously ravenous as the first one was. I think they made 17, 18 million. I could be off on that by a little bit, but regardless, it was a ton of money. They found a system called the Oracle system. I shouldn't say they found it, they created it. And really what it is it's a choose your own adventure exploration board game, but it's a system that allows multiple cards basically to use multiple mechanisms and multiple gameplay elements. So instead of every card just being for one thing, which is what most games are made like, here's a card, this is an action card, here's this card, this is an AI card. Instead of doing things like that, they made cards actually stand for multiple things. So, for instance, you have your life deck, an action deck, basically, that denotes how much life you have left in the party, or if you're playing solo for yourself. And as that depletes, you can use it for special abilities, you can use it for checks, and that's the cool thing. So you're flipping these cards over, and part of the card is going to help you with checks, with stars you're looking for, and the other part's going to give you abilities. So they're really taking the dynamic of making a card do multiple things. We've seen this kind of thing happen in Gloom Haven, for instance, where you can use, the card for the top or bottom half, that type of thing. So it's not just being stuck to the text on the card. Even games like, Mage Knight even have a little bit of that element in there. So there's a little bit of that element seen across a number of different games, and it seems to be a successful one. But the Seventh Continent does it differently because it adds that choose your own adventure into the mix on top of it. So you're going about exploring a ton of cards, and the playtime for this can span 5 minutes to like 1,000 minutes. It's outrageous. But there is a save mechanism where you can kind of, you basically put all this stuff back in the box, save it, and then pull it back out later. But everything you explored basically then becomes kind of shrouded in mystery again. And you have to almost re-explore it the next time you visit it. So you don't lose progress, but you definitely lose whatever was on the table visually in terms of what you had uncovered. I really highly recommend that if you haven't checked this out and played it at least, you should give it a shot. It might be right up your alley. The idea is that you are a character, one of which you've chosen. You're cursed, and you're trying to find a way to rid your curse. So it's very cool. It's created, the publisher is Serious Pulp, if I haven't mentioned that already. And they also had a second Kickstarter go in 2017, and there's a ton of people, like I mentioned, behind it. It's a high recommendation for me as a solo game. You will get lost in this. This is kind of like, if you were not a fan of Robinson Crusoe in terms of the mechanics of that particular game, but you're still looking for I want to be on an island exploring everything, this is it. You want the adventure, the thematic story, kind of like the unknown, this is it. This is 100% the game you want. So Seventh Continent, high recommendation, comes in at number 4 of the top 10 solo games of 2017. Number 3. Coming in at number 3 for the top 10 solo board games of 2017 is Too Many Bones. Too Many Bones is from Chip Theory Games. Adam and Josh Carlson made this one, and this game is really interesting because it uses dice building RPGs. At least that's what it's called, is a dice building RPG. You essentially are a Gearlock in the world of Daylor, and you have a tyrant which you select at the beginning of the game. Your goal is essentially to do either a short, medium, or long campaign, depending on how many encounters you want to go through, and you're trying to get all the way to the end without suffering too much pain as you go along, and be strong enough to take out the tyrant. You have a limited number of days, and that's basically how the counter in terms of time. So you can essentially, if you're doing really well in the encounters, you can get to the tyrant and have multiple attempts to take him down. But if you do really poorly in the encounters on the way to the tyrant, it can actually reduce the amount of times you can do a do-over or a retry at the tyrant, and that can really be kind of, and honestly, the timing of that can actually be a huge strategic thing, because if you choose to essentially, or if you actually happen to fail a bunch of encounters, you're not going to be progressing as fast. The days are ticking by. So it really is a big part of the strategy behind this game. And of course, you want to be doing an encounter and successfully achieving it every single time, so that when you get to the end, you have the most chances to take the tyrant down. So this game has elements of cooperative play, but of course, in the solo realm, that doesn't matter. It just allows for solo play. Deck and pool building, dice rolling for sure, being a dice RPG. Hand management, role-playing, and variable player power. So there is some role-playing happening here. If you do play solo, you can play it with one gear lock and get through the whole thing. You don't need to play two characters, but I do recommend that you actually play with two, because when you play with two, you can start seeing synergies between two characters. One can be melee, one can be range. There's a battle mat, there's a campaign mat that you track the encounters on. The battle mat is where you'll do all your fights with the different mobs that you run into, or baddies that you run into along in the world. And the new Kickstarter called Undertow, which just came out, is going to open up a whole new world that you can go into, and it's going to have a raft. It's kind of on the southern part of Daelor. There's going to be new mechanics for the battle maps, new battle maps in general. So this game, component quality-wise, is off the charts. There's been a number of people that I've heard say that the components aren't that great. That to this day boggles my mind. I could probably take 3 games off my shelf that would even fit close in comparison to the component quality in Too Many Bones. It's beyond nice. It's insane. The inserts inside the box fit everything back into place. All the components are high quality, and if there's any issues whatsoever with your game, and I had a couple when it came my way, when I got mine, they were quick to fix them and send them out to me. So I have absolutely no complaints with these guys, and I really enjoy what they have been putting out so far. So I'm really looking forward to what they've got in the future solo-wise. But Too Many Bones, by far, absolute 100% high recommendation at number 3. You can pick this one up through either one of their Kickstarters, because they always seem to go to Kickstarter for their games, or they actually have their store, and you can just go pick it up from their store as well. So again, a very solid number 3 on the top 10 solo games of 2017. Number 2. Coming in at number 2 of the top 10 solo games of 2017 is Kingdom Death Monster. That's right, it's number 2. This one is so high up the list, and it deserves it. This game is a masterpiece. It is a beast of a game. Not only are you going to get a ton of miniatures in the game, and it's going to require some assembling to get going, these miniatures are of the highest quality. I've been assembling, and I've actually started dabbling a little bit in Warhammer on the side, which I won't really be doing too much of on the channel. But I can tell you that I've compared some Warhammer to Kingdom Death just visually and in terms of look and feel, and they are right on par. Like, they are on par, and I'd almost in some situations give the nod to Kingdom Death Monster. Although in other situations I give the nod to Warhammer. They're just, at the end of the day, they're phenomenal quality. They're really nice looking, and it's not just about the miniatures, but that makes up a large majority of Kingdom Death Monster. When you first open up the box, as you can see from the videos that you're probably seeing right now, there's basically a gigantic layer that's just dedicated to the sprues that you have to put together. If you play games like Shadows of Brimstone before, you'll be very familiar with it, and you won't even blink an eye when you see all the miniatures. You'll be like, oh, this is perfect. I love this stuff. Other people that have never assembled miniatures will probably drop their jaw, and they might put the box back on the shelf and just be scared enough to open it ever again. But I highly recommend that you do, because if you can put these things together, and they really aren't that hard, you can get into the beginning first couple Lantern years and have a blast. So essentially all you need to get started is to have the white lion assembled. You just need 4 survivors assembled, and you can start playing. So 4 survivors and a lion is really easy. Those are some of the easier ones to build. And again, if you're having trouble getting those particular survivors to stick onto or glue to the faces, the face bases, then try just putting them on the flat ones if it's going to give you too much grief and it's your first time. But regardless, if you get those 5 miniatures built, you can start playing right away. The gameplay in this one is really cool. It's really well known, not only for its major boss battles or and stuff like that happening, but it's also for its settlement. And I think the settlement portion of this game is one of the most interesting facets of the Kingdom Death Monster world, because of the number of things that can happen in the settlement. Obviously, you're building your settlement. You're starting off as a couple characters who basically have landed in this, not landed, but essentially just woken up in this abyss of darkness, and there's stone faces all over the ground. You don't know what's going on. You're wiping black gunk out of your eyes. You're trying to figure out why you're here, what's going on, to then automatically be attacked and having people getting killed off by the White Lion. So that's kind of like the entryway into this thing. So it's dark, it's horror, it's mature theme for sure. So take those all into account for anyone that's younger. But it's a fantastic game. You're going to go on like a 5 to 30 lantern year campaign. You're going to be going through hunts. You're going to be going through showdowns, settlement phases, and stuff. It's a beast of a game, and it has just as many cards as it does miniatures. It has tons of cards that you're going to have to go through. And the really unique thing about the game is there's an AI deck actually specifically built for each monster that you fight. So you'll get used to certain AI cards over time. If you fight the White Lion enough, you'll start to realize what its major attacks are that you really don't want to happen to you. But then they all level up differently. So for instance, you can when you actually build the AI deck for a lion, depending on it, if it's level 1 or level 3, there'll be different ways to build that AI deck and stuff like that. The AI deck will have specific attacks. It also is as a counter to its life. So it's really cool. It has a lot of really unique things about it that I really enjoy. And this is going to be something we're absolutely going to play on the channel, because all I have currently done so far is unboxed it and started building the miniatures and played it off camera. But we are going to start playing it on camera soon. And I'm going to take you through kind of a tutorial on how to get this thing going, because it's one of the games that has been on the hotness list on Board Game Geek for some time, and has also been a center of controversy for some time as well, but deserves, honestly, the utmost respect as a board game. It is fantastic. It's an amazing world, and it's worth discovering, or at least trying. So at a solid number 2, Kingdom Death Monster from Adam Poots. Number 1. All right, so coming in at number 1, I don't even know if I have to announce this again, because this has been overdone so many times, even on my channel. I've even done the last top 10 that I did. The number 1 game for 2017 for solo gamers is hands down Gloom Haven. There is no doubts about it. This game has cemented itself as 2017 in general. You could just write 2017 on the box. It's won every award you could possibly think of from all kinds of different publishers. Or not publishers, but different outlets. It has number 1 ranking overall on Board Game Geek, number 1 thematic, number 1 strategy. It plays with 1 player. There's I don't know what else to say about it. It's a fantastic game. It has Euro elements built into kind of an Ameritrash setting. I think that's one of the reasons why it jives with so many people and connects with so many people, because there's so many people that are solidly on the Eurotrash, the Ameritrash side and the Euro side. And I think this really brings those two sides together. And of course, some of us are on both sides. We enjoy both types of games, like I do. But some people are very heavily just Ameritrash or very heavily just Euro. And this Gloomhaven game really took those two worlds, brought them together. And by doing so, I think created like a beast of a community in terms of support. Because they really nailed it on the head in terms of thematic feel with strategy, and as well as the Euro style card play and stuff like that in terms of choices and things like that. It's a fantastic game. So it has mechanisms like action movement programming, cooperative play, grid movement, hand management, modular boards. It has role-playing, simultaneous action selection, storytelling, and variable player powers. It is a massive campaign game. It's going to have like over 100 different scenarios for you to go through. If you have the solo scenarios, I highly recommend you get those as well. That'll push you over 100 scenarios that you can play through. It's a beast of a game, and it's one of those things, if you get deep into it, you probably won't be playing anything else for a long time, and that's very, very similar with Kingdom Death Monster as well. So again, high recommendation. Gloom Haven, cannot say it enough. It sits on the top of both of my top 10 lists for 2017. Easily recommended. Have to check it out. And now it's finally starting to hit retail stores. So this is the perfect time to get in on Gloom Haven. All right, so that's going to wrap up the 2017 top 10 solo board games, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully it was useful for you, and just another mention that no top 10 list is ever perfect, so I'm sure if there's anything here missing, let me know in the comments below if there's any games that I didn't mention that you really, truly enjoyed through 2017, and also I'd love to hear your thoughts on the list as well. So thanks again for watching, guys, and as always, keep on rolling solo.